Mary Kay Letourneau became one of the most notorious teachers in American history after authorities discovered she'd formed an illegal relationship with a 12-year-old student in her class, a crime that shocked the country and completely destroyed her family. She was arrested in 1997 and sent to prison, where she gave birth to his child while still serving time. When she got out on parole, a judge ordered her to stay away from the boy entirely, but she was caught violating that order and was sent back to prison to finish a full 7-year sentence, a move prosecutors said showed how disturbingly deep her attraction to him ran. When she was finally released, the story took an even darker turn. The former student, now an adult, chose to reunite with her, and the pair eventually married in 2005 despite their relationship beginning as a felony case, described by experts as a profound abuse of power. They stayed together for over a decade before finally separating, leaving behind one of the most unsettling and controversial teacher-student scandals in recorded history. Amu Haji, an Iranian hermit dubbed the dirtiest man in the world, avoided bathing for nearly 60 years because he believed cleanliness would make him sick. He lived this way into his 90s, smoking animal dung, eating roadkill, sleeping on the ground, and rarely interacting with others. Then in 2022, villagers finally convinced him to bathe for the first time in decades. Just a few weeks afterward, Haji fell severely ill and died at age 94. Matthew Day Merritt was born without legs and learned to walk on his hands from early childhood. As a young boy, his small size and unusual movements led filmmakers to place him inside the E.T. suit for the movie, where his hand walking gave the alien its unsettling, otherworldly motion. In October of 2018, 53-year-old Allison Gibson became trapped in her own bathtub after sitting down to bathe and realizing she could no longer reach the grab bar she would normally pull herself up with. Alone in her home, she remained stuck for 5 days, surviving without food by drinking water directly from the tap. As time passed, she weakened and struggled with exhaustion, alternating the water between hot and cold to stay conscious and hydrated. From October 15th to the 19th, no one noticed she was missing until a mail carrier saw her mail piling up and alerted neighbors. Police were called and she was finally rescued, having narrowly avoided death from dehydration, hypothermia, or exhaustion after nearly a week immobilized in her own bathtub. This footage shows former Nazi concentration camp guard Joseph Schutz covering his face as he arrived at a German courtroom in 2022. At 101 years old, Schutz became the oldest person ever tried and convicted for Holocaust-era crimes. Prosecutors argued that while serving as an SS guard at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp between 1942 and 1945, he knowingly assisted in the systematic murder of at least 3,500 prisoners. Schutz claimed he did absolutely nothing wrong and was not aware of the gruesome crimes being carried out at the camp. He was convicted as an accessory to murder and sentenced to 5 years in prison, though he remained free while appealing the verdict. Schutz died in April of 2023 before serving his sentence. Angie Barlow, a British woman with a severe fear of dentists, avoided professional dental care for roughly a decade by repeatedly supergluing loose or fallen teeth back into her mouth. Instead of fixing the underlying decay and gum disease, the glue trapped bacteria beneath the teeth and caused progressive infections. Over time, the damage became catastrophic, with dentists later finding that up to 90% of the bones supporting her upper teeth had been destroyed. By the time she finally sought treatment, 11 teeth had to be removed, much of her jawbone had deteriorated, and she required extensive reconstructive surgery and dental implants to restore basic oral function. Jeff Garcia, best known for being the voice of Sheen in Jimmy Neutron, died on December 10, 2025 at age 50 after a terrible chain of medical emergencies that began months earlier. He first suffered a brain aneurysm that caused him to collapse and hit his head, then later endured a stroke that left his health severely weakened. After a bout of pneumonia and repeated hospital visits for trouble breathing, Jeff's condition crashed when one of his lungs suddenly collapsed, forcing doctors to place him on life support. His family ultimately made the decision to pull the plug, ending a rapid decline that left fans stunned. That same day, veteran voice actor Jim Ward, who played Doug Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsdale Dimmadome, and dozens of other roles, died at 66 after years of complications with advanced Alzheimer's disease. Ward had already retired from voice work several years earlier as the disease progressed, losing his ability to continue performing before eventually requiring long-term care. According to his wife, the disease steadily deteriorated his health until his death on December 11, 2025. Together, their deaths marked the losses of two of the most iconic voices of Nickelodeon cartoons. This was the moment a man attempted to rob a small loans office in Kazakhstan, smashing through thin laminated safety glass at the receptionist's window. He then quickly climbed inside, grabbed the female clerk, and threatened her with a knife to force her cooperation. He stole about $340 before fleeing, but police arrested him later that same day. Authorities confirmed he was eventually prosecuted and ultimately sentenced to 7 years in prison for the robbery, while the clerk managed to escape unharmed. This person looked over the balcony of their high-rise apartment building to realize they owned a cat, not a pussy. Here's a clip of a man trapped inside a grain silo with thousands of pounds of grain pressing in from every direction. What makes this situation so horrifying is that grain doesn't behave like a solid. Once it starts moving, it flows like liquid, pulling a person under like quicksand. Within seconds, someone can be buried up to their chest, and struggling only makes it worse. By this point, self-rescue is nearly impossible. The pressure restricts breathing, and panic speeds up suffocation. The only real chance of survival is to stop moving and hold a small pocket of air around your face, keeping your head above the grain until rescuers arrive. Accordingly, dozens of farmers die every year in this exact way due to grain entrapment. In 2008, 23-year-old New York teacher Hannah Upp suddenly disappeared during a morning run, prompting a massive search across Manhattan. She was found nearly 20 days later floating near the Hudson River, dehydrated, hypothermic, but miraculously still alive. Doctors later diagnosed her with dissociative fugue, a rare condition in which a person can mindlessly travel or wander with no awareness of their identity, the same condition Walter White claimed he had in Breaking Bad. 5 years later in Maryland, she went missing again. She was located 2 days later lying in a nearby creek, still wearing the same clothes she'd left home in and with no memory of how she got there. Her third disappearance happened in 2017 when she was living in the US Virgin Islands. She reportedly prepared for work as usual before leaving home just as a hurricane was approaching. Her car was later located near a beach with her wallet, phone, and keys inside, but she was never found. Searches by air, land, and water turned up no additional clues, and since that day, Hannah Upp has never been seen again. Susan King spent 6.5 years in prison for a murder she couldn't possibly have committed. She had one leg, weighed under 100 pounds, and didn't even own a car. Yet police claimed she beat, shot, and dragged a man before tossing his body off a bridge 40 miles away. The lead detective built the entire case on lies, fake ballistics, drag marks that were actually water damage, and blood evidence that never matched the victim. And investigators later admitted they had doubts about her guilt before it even went to trial. But terrified of facing life in prison or the death penalty, Susan took a plea deal and went to prison for murdering a man she never even laid her hands on. Years later, a different man confessed in detail to the murder, even describing facts never released to the public, and even claimed the same detective threatened him to stay quiet. Only then was Susan exonerated, and the state eventually paid her $750,000. The detective who framed her never faced charges. He simply retired while under investigation for unrelated sexual misconduct. This was the moment when a DoorDash delivery driver was caught on camera spraying something into a family's Arby's order, seconds after dropping it off and taking a picture before casually walking away. Indiana man Mark Carden said when his wife began eating, she immediately started choking, gasping, and vomiting, and her husband noticed a strange residue coating the inside of the bag. After reviewing the footage, he realized the driver had allegedly pepper sprayed the food on purpose for reasons no one can explain. The sheriff's office is now investigating, and the case could lead to a felony consumer product tampering charge, the kind filed when a regular delivery turns into a potentially life-threatening attack. A 10-pound mini dachshund named Valerie vanished during a camping trip on Kangaroo Island, then somehow survived 529 days alone in the Australian bush. Rescuers spent months trying to trap her, stunned that such a tiny house dog had endured snakes, heat, and feral predators long enough to actually gain weight. Some think she lived off roadkill, while others believe someone was feeding her, since no one can explain how she lasted nearly a year and a half in one of the harshest landscapes in the world. When she was finally caught using a trap baited with her favorite toys and her owner's clothes, vets found her fit and well, closing one of the most improbable pet survival stories ever documented. OF creator Bonnie Blue has been arrested in Bali after police raided a villa suspected of being used to film explicit content. 16 men were detained with her, but while most were released, Bonnie and 2 British men were held as officers seized phones and cameras based on a tip from inside the villa. She's now in immigration custody, questioned daily, and without her passport, as officials prepare a court hearing and consider deportation in a long-term blacklist. Under Indonesia's morality laws, producing pornographic content can carry up to 15 years in prison. Mary Carol McDonnell, a 73-year-old former true crime TV producer, allegedly conned banks by posing as the heiress to an $80 million trust fund that never existed, securing nearly $30 million in fraudulent loans, including a $15 million payout she was never qualified to receive. But before the scheme unraveled, she completely disappeared, leaving behind a federal indictment, multiple aliases, and lenders scrambling to recover their losses. With possible ties to Los Angeles, Alabama, and Dubai, she was added to the FBI's most wanted list in 2025 as one of the country's most elusive white-collar fugitives. In 2022, Kazuki Takahashi, the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh!, drowned off the coast of Okinawa while trying to save a woman, her child, and a U.S. soldier who were trapped in a violent rip current. Witnesses watched him jump into 6-foot waves and swim toward the struggling swimmers as the water twisted into a whirlpool. The soldier ultimately pulled the victims to safety, but Takahashi was overtaken by the current and vanished beneath the surf. His body was found 2 days later still in snorkeling gear, and investigators confirmed he died during the rescue attempt. Anthony Olson spent 9 years being poisoned by chemotherapy for a cancer he never had. In 2011, doctors told the 21-year-old he had a deadly blood disorder and wouldn't live to see the next year without aggressive treatment. When a follow-up biopsy came back completely normal, he was told to ignore it because it meant the chemo was working. For nearly a decade, he endured transfusions, crippling side effects, and the emotional fallout of believing he was dying, all while the original diagnosis was wrong. Later reviews showed Anthony never even had cancer at any point, meaning every drop of chemotherapy and emotional turmoil was unnecessary. By the time the mistake was uncovered, the treatment had already reshaped his entire life. Victoria Wright was born with cherubism, a rare genetic disorder that causes the bones in the lower face to grow erratically, giving her a swollen, distorted appearance that drew cruel comments from strangers her entire life. The condition can be extremely painful by tightening the jaw, straining the facial nerves, and making basic things like chewing or even speaking very difficult at times. As a child, she endured constant looks, bullying, and even adults snickering about her in public as if she wasn't standing right there. But instead of hiding, she turned her diagnosis into a mission, calling out the cruelty she faced after a BBC documentary sparked a wave of online abuse, and becoming a fierce advocate for people with facial differences. In 2015, Mary Cerruti vanished from her Houston bungalow without a trace. 2 years later, the new owners found her skeletal remains sealed inside a wall along with her glasses and shoes. Investigators believe she fell through the attic floor and became trapped, slowly dying alone in total darkness with no way of climbing out. But because she was one of the last homeowners refusing to sell as developers closed in around her, many people still suspect something darker. Her official cause of death remains undetermined. His head snapping back as he lost all control, tumbling through the air with no ability to deploy his parachute. Realizing what was happening, instructor Sheldon McFarland chased him down midair, fighting the wind and closing the distance with mere seconds to spare. McFarland eventually managed to grab Jones, stabilize his limp body, and pull his ripcord just in time, preventing a horrific fall that would have instantly been fatal. Eventually, the ride was safely lowered once conditions stabilized and no physical injuries were reported. This was the moment Icelandic singer Björk crashed out at Bangkok Airport in 1996, lunging at reporter Julie Kaufman and knocking her to the ground, moments after the reporter simply greeted her with the words, "Welcome to Bangkok." What appeared to be an explosive reaction to a harmless greeting was later explained by Björk as a breaking point. She claimed Kaufman had stalked her and her 9-year-old son for days across multiple locations, ignoring requests to stop. Björk said the airport encounter triggered fear for her child's safety. Kaufman denied any stalking, no charges were filed, and the footage became one of the most infamous celebrity confrontations of the 90s. On April 16, 2014, the South Korean ferry Sewol capsized and sank off the coast of Jindo while carrying 476 people, most of them high school students on a field trip. An abrupt turn combined with overloaded cargo caused the ship to list and rapidly flood. Passengers were repeatedly told over the intercom to stay where they were, instructions most of them followed as water quickly filled the decks. The captain and several crew members abandoned ship early, leaving hundreds trapped inside. The ferry sunk in roughly 2 hours, killing 304 people, the majority of them teenagers. The captain was convicted of gross negligence and murder by omission and sentenced to life in prison, while multiple crew members and shipping company officials received prison terms. In 2001, U.S. border agents at the Mexican border discovered 42-year-old Enrique Aguilar Canchola sitting inside a hollowed-out passenger seat that had been modified to look completely normal. He'd been sewn into the seat to sneak into the U.S. undetected, but agents noticed the seat looked unusually bulky and pulled the car aside. Canchola was immediately arrested along with the driver. In 1980, the FBI set up a fake company to expose corrupt politicians, and 25% of the congressmen who were offered bribes accepted them, leading to multiple convictions in one of the largest stings in U.S. history. In 2025, South Carolina teaching assistant Alexander Lewis was arrested after repeatedly spraying a powerful fart spray inside of West Florence High School, triggering nausea, headaches, and respiratory issues among students and staff. The odor contaminated parts of the building's ventilation system, forcing inspections and cleanup that totaled more than $55,000 in damage. Lewis was charged with disturbing schools and malicious injury to property, turning what he thought was a harmless prank into one of the most expensive school incidents of the year. In 1996, 31-year-old Canadian man Blair Adams suddenly became convinced someone was trying to kill him. He abruptly withdrew his life savings, emptied his safety deposit box of gold, cash, and jewelry, and made several frantic but failed attempts to leave the country. After being denied entry to the U.S., he inexplicably abandoned his construction job in Vancouver, flew to Washington, D.C., rented a car, and began driving aimlessly across multiple states. Witnesses described him as paranoid and agitated, constantly checking over his shoulder and telling strangers someone was after him. Days later, his naked body was found in a Knoxville, Tennessee parking lot, his clothes torn and scattered around him, along with $4,000 in cash, gold, and jewelry, none of it stolen. An autopsy revealed he had sustained many cuts and abrasions consistent with a struggle, and a violent blow had ruptured his stomach, causing sepsis and eventually death. Yet there was no weapon found, no DNA evidence pointing to a killer, and his car keys were found tossed under a nearby vehicle. Hotel staff recalled him pacing in the lobby the night before as if waiting for someone. Nearly 3 decades later, Blair Adams' death remains one of the most baffling unsolved cases in North America. On July 5, 2011, 37-year-old Kelly Thomas, a homeless man with schizophrenia, was beaten, pinned down, and repeatedly tased by Fullerton police during a violent encounter captured on audio and surveillance footage. Officers had responded to a call about someone allegedly breaking into cars, and when they found Thomas rummaging through trash near a bus depot, they claimed he became uncooperative during questioning, a claim later disputed by witnesses and contradicted by portions of the footage. As officers piled on top of him, Thomas screamed for his father, begged them to stop, and cried out that he was being killed. Prosecutors later noted he said, "Dad, help me," 31 times, "Help me, God," 26 times, and "Okay" or "I'm sorry" over and over as he slipped into unconsciousness. He arrived at the hospital in a coma with severe head trauma, multiple broken bones in his face, irreversible brain swelling, and died 5 days later. 2 officers were charged, including one for second-degree murder, but both of them walked free after the case collapsed in court. In 1957, 2 young sisters in England, Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock, were killed instantly when a speeding car suddenly struck them during their walk to church. Their parents were shattered by the loss, but a year later they had twin daughters, Jillian and Jennifer, who as they grew began showing strange overlaps with the former girls' lives, recognizing toys they'd never seen, describing places they'd never visited, and developing an intense fear of cars. Jennifer was reportedly even born with birthmarks in the same locations as Jacqueline's. The memories eventually faded, but the Pollock twins became one of the most cited cases in discussions of childhood reincarnation, with some people believing it was true reincarnation and others arguing it was grief, suggestion, or outright coincidence. A 6-year-old boy from Missouri was subjected to a staged kidnapping orchestrated by his own family to teach him a lesson about stranger danger. Police say an aunt's coworker lured him into a truck, told him he'd never see his mother again, and threatened to nail him to the wall of a shed. When he started sobbing, the man showed him a handgun and ordered him to stop crying. Investigators say he tied the boy's hands and feet, covered his face, and drove him around for hours while the child begged to go home. Once back at the house, relatives brought him into the basement and kept the act going, lecturing him about strangers while he was still terrified and restrained. Multiple adults were later charged after authorities said the ordeal caused genuine trauma, inflicted by the very people meant to protect him. In March of 2019, rising Liverpool indie duo Hers were in the middle of their first U.S. tour when tragedy struck. After performing a packed show in Phoenix, 24-year-old Stephen Fitzpatrick and 25-year-old Alden Lauding began their overnight drive to California with their tour manager. Just before 1 a.m., their van was hit head-on by a pickup truck driving the wrong way on Interstate 10. The collision erupted into flames, killing all 4 men instantly. Investigators reported no signs of braking and found an open container in the wrong-way driver's wreckage, suggesting alcohol may have been involved. Just hours earlier, the band had posted that their US tour was going swimmingly and that they were almost home. Their debut album, Invitation to Hers, would become their final record. In 2012, a Pennsylvania tree worker named James Valentine was trimming branches high off the ground when his chainsaw suddenly kicked back. In an instant, the blade plunged deep into his neck and shoulder, stopping just millimeters short of severing vital arteries. Miraculously, the chain jammed before it could spin further, but the saw itself remained embedded in his flesh. First responders found him conscious with the chainsaw still lodged in place and carefully stabilized it as he was airlifted to a trauma center. After hours of delicate surgery, doctors successfully removed the saw and repaired the massive tissue damage. Against all odds, Valentine made a full recovery. When Disney casted Tim Allen as the Santa Claus in 1994, the studio quietly broke its own rule against hiring ex-convicts. Back in 1978, he was arrested at the airport while trying to smuggle more than a pound of cocaine and faced a possible life sentence before cutting a deal to inform on other dealers. He spent over 2 years in federal prison, getting out in 1981, then spent the next decade rebuilding his career until Home Improvement turned him into a star in 1991. So by the time Disney handed him the lead role in The Santa Claus, they were making one of the rarest casting exceptions in company history, turning a former federal prisoner into the face of Christmas. A recent medical case from Denmark describes a 39-year-old man who died within 26 hours after drinking water from a coconut that had been sitting unrefrigerated on a kitchen table for more than a month. When he punctured it with a straw, he noticed it tasted strange but kept drinking. Inside, the coconut had become contaminated with Aspergillus flavus, a fungus that produces aflatoxin, one of the most potent natural liver poisons known. Within hours, he developed abdominal pain, vomiting, and liver failure. And despite emergency treatment, he died the next day from drinking coconut water. Sports Broadcasting Hall of Famer Marv Albert, long known as the voice of basketball, was one of the most recognizable play-by-play commentators in NBA history. But in 1997, his career nearly collapsed after he was convicted of forcing a woman to perform oral sex on him. Evidence included bite marks matching his teeth and semen found at the scene. Another woman accused him of assault after arriving at his hotel room to find him wearing only silk panties and a garter belt. Albert pled guilty to assault and battery, was fired from NBC, and vanished from broadcasting, only to return less than 2 years later. Despite it all, he went on to call games for decades, still celebrated as one of the sport's most iconic voices. In 2007, 19-year-old Michael John Anderson from Minnesota lured a woman to his home using a fake Craigslist ad for a babysitting job. When 24-year-old Catherine Olson arrived, he shot her in the back, dragged her bleeding body down a staircase, and stuffed her into the trunk of a car, which he later abandoned. When questioned, Anderson chillingly confessed that he killed her simply because he was bored and wanted to know what it felt like.